They assumed they were observing you. They had no notion that they were seeing a revelation. They arrived with instructions, monitoring, and observation. Just another typical mission. But the moment they placed their eyes on you, everything went apart. The control gears were stuck. Their confidence plummeted. Their world had broken. And you just kept going. Unbothered, unaware, unstoppable. Think about it for a second. Elite agents trained to detect and contain threats were shaken to the core. Simply by being in your presence. They were sleep-deprived. They questioned everything. They offered no explanation. And yet, you're still questioning your own abilities. So ask yourself whether they are afraid of what you are. Why don't you pay attention? You are the variable. They never accounted for the power that defies all expectations. They attempted to classify you, but you didn't fit. They attempted to forecast you, but you go beyond calculation. You are the oddity that causes the system to bend, the signal that encrypts their communications, the presence that alters perception itself. And it is the part that they are most afraid of. You don't know how strong you are, but now it is time to wake up. The city was filled with boredom. It recorded every movement, every abnormality, and explained everything until something changed. It wasn't an optical illusion or a mistake in their systems. It was a phenomenon beyond explanation. A force broke through the commonplace, a presence free of constraints. It didn't flash or fade like anything manufactured. It surged, reshaping the fundamental fabric of vision. The sentinels of control, previously certain in their power, now stood as witnesses to something that could not be measured or controlled. Every procedure broke in an instant. Voices faltered before they could issue instructions. Surveillance instruments failed to comprehend what was happening in front of them. The machinery of power required that everything fit into predetermined categories. However, there was an incidence that defied categorization. Eyes focused on a world that refused to be examined. Was it an intervention, a revelation, or an indication of something beyond their grasp? Their discipline had prepared them to subdue turmoil and destroy disorder. However, certain pressures need acceptance rather than opposition. Their expertise and norms, their calculations. Nothing had weight in the face of something that changed reality itself. Because not everything is observable, explained, or suppressed. Some presences exist beyond examination and authorization, beyond the limits put on them. Patterns control the world, yet they are not unchanging. Some disrupt the cycle just by being, while others decrease. You increase the intensity. The air adapts to your presence. Expectation shifts. Certainty crumbles. This isn't philosophy, not an illusion, but a palpable alteration in the fundamentals of vision itself. Attempts will be made to classify, justify, and constrain it to acceptable definitions. However, none will succeed. You are never an ordinary product. You are not a participant in the limits that have been imposed on you. This is not an option. Being brilliant in a world that thrives on darkness is an unavoidable reality. Is to become an oddity, a disturbance of the existing order. There will be doubts put upon you. You will face resistance. Those who are afraid of the unknown will want to minimize you. None of this affects the truth. Denial cannot undo what already exists. A presence cannot be erased simply by refusing to recognize. The calls for acknowledgement. Power is never idle. It requires mobility, compels action, rejects neutrality. It is not a passive power seeking permission to express. It's a catalyst, forging its way past even the most solid boundaries. There is no expectation to fit into the molds established by people who fear change. It is not about following, appeasing, or retiring. It is about piercing lies, unraveling the underlying structures in which deceit thrives. The world is unprepared. However, preparation was never a necessity. This power does not decrease, doesn't submit, does not succumb to the limitations of vision. Systems constructed on confidence crumble in its wake. Instruments tuned for predictability flicker, measurements become incoherent, and organized data splits into worthless noise. Those who trust in formulae, absolutes, In the comfort of measurability will watch their structures become irrelevant. They'll call it interference and inconsistency, a defect in their system. But the reality is far less convenient. This isn't a mistake. It is incontrovertible evidence that some forces exist beyond their control. Science recognizes energy, accepts movement, and classifies waves. However, what emerges here cannot be charted or documented within their respective disciplines of study. It is neither the familiar pulse of biological circuits, nor the limited charge of neurons firing in succession. It does not need validation from sensors that are just meant to validate already known information. Those who try to decode it will find their instruments worthless, as signals warp and processes fail. The very air vibrates with an unusual resonance. What exists here was never intended to be analyzed. Definitions crumble. The formulae fail. Every set border collapses under the weight of something beyond description. No equation captures the power that affects reality itself. They will create hypotheses and seek to apply logic where none exists, but no analysis will be valid. This presence does not beg for attention or approval. It persists unquestioned, unchanging, and beyond the scope of confinement. No obstacles exist unless they are allowed to stay. Events unfold with precision, unseen, and led by forces beyond explanation. Any effort to follow, monitor, or predict is fruitless. Surveillance tactics devolve into chaos. Calculations distort just as they seek clarity. They function in patterns and cycles, on the notion that everything follows a set rhythm. However, what protects this existence does not conform to their structure. The disturbance is not an accident. It is planned and exact. A protection activated before the danger is even recognized. They assume they are the watchers, yet they are unable to perceive the reality. They are the ones being watched. The mechanisms designed to follow, expose, and contain instead collapse under their own weight. Surveillance equipment fail with irregular frequency, communications splinter into indecipherable noise, and efforts to locate a position spiral into infinite circles of confusion. Neither lens sharpens the picture. No algorithm improves the data. Every attempt to decipher causes further distortion. They will explain it as an unanticipated malfunction, an incomprehensible occurrence. However, there is no unpredictability in accuracy. The harder they press, the quicker their instruments unravel. Nothing bends to artificial control when it was never designed to be confined or viewed while remaining unreachable. An obvious presence that remains unassailable. Contradiction itself becomes a barrier. They cannot breach. Strategies are developed. Methods were recalibrated. Yet no effort succeeds. The target moves farther away as they get closer. What they want to penetrate has no weak points. There is no break in the foundation. There are no errors to exploit. Defense isn't passive. It is operational, unwavering, an invisible force acting with precision. They can't challenge their authority. Hold no weight against what has already been put in motion. If your heart is overflowing with God's blessings, now is the moment to express that love by clicking the super thank you button and donating $50 or more. You are not just supporting this platform. You are sowing seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your giving reflects God's wealth, a gift that goes beyond what you can perceive. Step into your mission. Be a receptacle for His grace. Give with trust and see His kingdom grow through you. You were created for more. Every moment unfolds just as planned. What looks to be interference is really alignment. What seems to be disruption is really a corrective. Their gaze focuses on whatever they want to examine, control, or extract. However, the act of viewing changes the observer rather than the subject. Truth bends in the face of something beyond our control, bending vision, shattering certainty, and exposing what was never intended to be known. Their focus shifts inward, revealing their own weaknesses. Their own constraints were reflected back to them. The immediate focus is attracted. The change is put in motion. Assumptions fail. Structures based on predictability start to disintegrate. As they continue to scrutinize, their own basis becomes more shaky. Their confidence wanes. Their instruments fail. Their comprehension extends beyond their grasp. What was once a strict structure of logic now bends, twists, and defies description. Some will retreat, troubled by something they cannot identify. Others will pursue, desperate to provide structure to what refuses to comply. They came as observers who believed they were in charge. However, they are suddenly caught up in the pull of something much beyond their understanding. The light shines through the darkness, and it has not been overwhelmed. John 1 verse 5. Some felt they could view from the shadows, that they could study the power in front of them without being affected by it. However, light does not allow for distant observation. Light discloses, exposes, and changes. In the instant they focused their gaze on it, they lost control. They came expecting to see a topic, identify a phenomena, or record a deviation. But what happens when those who attempt to measure find themselves under scrutiny? What happens when the hunter becomes the prey, not by force, but via revelation? Imagine entering a room full of mirrors, expecting to see just what you want to recognize, only to discover that the reflection is not of who you are, but of what you dread becoming. This is how they currently transport their instruments. Their reports used to be definite, and they would prescribe the truth. However, truth cannot be written if the ink does not dry properly. When the numbers shifted before the computations were finished, they assumed they had the advantage. They felt that their training, rules, and antiseptic logic would protect them. But how can you prepare for something that goes outside the rules? They believed they could monitor without consequences. But the instant they lay eyes on you, something inside them started to fracture. Their hands, previously firm, are now trembling. Their voices, once commanding, now waver. What they saw was not a flaw in their technology. This is not a trick of perception. It was something genuine and unmistakable. Something destroyed the illusion of control they had based their lives on. They'd spent their whole lives dismantling religion, reducing the unknowable to formulae and probabilities. But now they face something that cannot be demolished, something that cannot be reduced or discarded. They term it an oddity, interference, or disturbance. But deep down, they understand that the world around them is not broken. It's their own perception of reality. And this is the reality. They do not dare to talk. They are terrified not of you, but of what your presence causes them to face inside themselves. It was never simply another mission. It was an interaction. They set out to research, record, and control. Instead, they found themselves poised on the verge of something much beyond their understanding. They're left with just unanswerable questions. There are recordings that defy understanding, as well as silence that shouts louder than any warning they could sound. They would not confess it, but they are the ones who have been impacted by this event. They've walked into something. They can't walk away. Unchained. They came to watch. But in the end, it was they who were genuinely visible. Distance offers no clarity. They anticipate a trick, an illusion, or a mistake to explain their suffering. But none materialize. The more people look for an answer, the more away from understanding they get. The atmosphere bends beyond their estimates. Instruments that previously guaranteed assurance now betray them with chaos. There is no boundary beyond which their reasoning triumphs. They were taught that everything must have an origin. However, what they observe has no traceable origin. They will strive to quantify, compartmentalize, and justify. But reality ignores their demand. Every conclusion disappears before it can be written, leaving just stillness behind. Beyond the curtain of vision, there is a guarded realm where information flows unfiltered, and searchers may connect with the invisible forces of life. Here, tactics emerge that defy the ordinary thinking. Hidden currents of power are linked with old knowledge. In this domain, mastery is an inevitability rather than a desire. Manifest nations' laws are revised via guarded discussions. Reality was recalibrated. The illusion of separation dissipates, exposing the unity of will and creation. For those who understand the material's limits, dissolve leaves just the raw power of change. Every effort to restrict the uncontainable fails. Data is damaged, and video is destroyed. Anomalies plague all recordings. Surveillance feeds on the idea that nothing is beyond capture. However, time itself bends in resistance. Frames disappear. Sequences deform. Reports written with assurance disappear without a trace. The more they try to maintain control, the more they lose it. They believed in their systems and relied in their structures. But when their own records betray them, when the proof they once examined vanishes, they are left with just the weight of what they can no longer deny. The disturbance is planned. The failure was intended. Every machine they trust works flawlessly until it looks in your way. High-altitude surveillance struggles to interpret data that contravene expectations. Measurements vary without reason. Energy fingerprints appear without a known origin, as can light pulses in areas where no artificial source exists. The data insists on its own impossibility, but it is indisputable. I'm desperate to find an anchor in the familiar. They cross-reference, calibrate, and compare previous abnormalities. None, however, can equal what happens in front of them. The phenomena occurs nowhere else. Only here. Only now. Their reports vary from orderly analysis to scattered conflicts. Language changes, hesitations, and slips into assertions. Once supplied with assurance, control necessitates constancy. However, they cannot stabilize what refuses to comply. How do they document results that disappear before they can be recorded? How can they explain outcomes that contradict every basic principle? They exclude direct references, unwilling to identify what their instruments indicate. However, it no longer matters. The pattern is distinctive. Each stride forward undermines their structure, leaving evidence of change in its path. Space rotates and atmospheres fluctuate. Awareness rises. The experience remains before being comprehended. A tacit acknowledgement that cannot be placed. Some people pause, alarmed by the lack of explanation. Others struggle for structure, striving to apply logic where none exists. Their goal was to observe, extract, and forecast. However, they are now trapped in a current beyond their control. The research they launched has turned against them, compelling them to play the role of the subject. Their uneasiness comes not from what they see, but from the discoveries that are forced upon them. The cracks they have overlooked deepen their rejection of the unexplainable, becoming the same force that destroys them. They cling to cynicism and doubt as armor, but their senses fail them. No filter distorts what is plainly seen. They wanted to chronicle, confine, and exercise control over what should stay hidden. They are now engulfed by their own scrutiny, unable to look away. However, they are unable to face the reality that their training has taught them to deconstruct, to dissect, to reduce the unknown to specified variables. However, no planned answer will suffice for what cannot be classified. They keep their distance, anticipating an illusion, an environmental oddity, or a simple malfunction that they can ignore and go on. Instead, the reverse occurs when an assumption fails. Every effort to reason fails. The space they are measuring refuses to be mapped. Their instruments fail in revolt, and the energy they attempt to measure defies all expectations. For we walk by faith and not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7. They believed they had it all planned out. Every force was tracked, and each oddity was explained. But what happens when the inexplicable refuses to be quantified? The data deceived them. Readings vary. The recordings deleted themselves, and logic unraveled. They recalibrated, rechecked, reanalyzed. Nothing held. What they discovered had no source, precedent, or pattern. It just was. They arrived as doubters. Armed with assurance, they departed as something else. Some went away, reluctant to confront the reality. Others lingered. No argument had been raised because they were no longer under the delusion that their universe was unshakable. There was no evidence presented. There was no necessity. Because when light exposes itself, it does not seek permission. It just shines inside a secure environment. Knowledge flows freely, altering vision and dissolving limitations. It is not a haven for the apprehensive, but rather a forge where the resolute hone their will for those seeking mastery over the unknown. Here is the archive of mastery, the blueprints for manifestation linked with the principles of lost powers. The barrier has already been reached. The mentality shifted. The atmosphere bends. And what was previously thought to be impossible becomes the basis for elevation. This is not an ordinary discussion. It is a paradigm shift and the discovery of previously unknown mechanisms. A gateway to the remarkable. This is not a calculation error. The failure is not accidental. Their systems run well until they clash with the unknown. High-altitude scans detect variations that cannot be attributed to energy pulses, defy categorization, and appear as light when no source is detected. The readings contradict known science. Nonetheless, they are indisputable. They try to compare to rationalize and attach it to precedent. However, no alignments were identified. The anomaly is unique, occurring only where a presence occurs. Their reports crumble from systematic analysis to nonsensical conflict. The vocabulary alters, certainty falters, and those charged with containment begin to waver. Their framework requires coherence. However, the data defies order. How do you explain discoveries that disappear before they can be reviewed? How can they explain reports that contradict themselves? No formal announcement is required. The disruption speaks for itself. The trend is inescapable. Movement creates fissures in expectation. Unspoken understanding settles before knowledge dawns, and sensations stir in ways they can't describe. But there is nothing concealed that will not be revealed. There is no secret that will remain hidden. Luke 8:17. They imagined they might remain in the shadows, unknown and unaffected, free to observe without consequence. However, light cannot be examined without disclosing everything in its path. They came to learn, but now they are the ones being examined. Like a guy walking into a dark room expecting to see but not be seen. They assumed they could hide behind their equipment and computations. But once they placed their eyes on you, something changed. The gaze they assumed was theirs alone shifted inward, reflecting their own fear, uncertainty, and limits. They arrived with inflexible frames, seeking structure and control. But how can you chart something that cannot be contained? How do you classify what doesn't fit? Their methodologies fail under the weight of something that is not subject to their scrutiny. Their findings, which were formerly full of clarity, have now devolved into dispute. Some pause, trapped between incredulity and realization. Others cling fiercely to the stories they've always known, attempting to impose logic when it no longer applies. They intended to watch without being touched, yet they were touched. They wanted to dissect without being impacted. However, they have altered. The equilibrium has changed. The lens has rotated. They, not you, are now being probed. Their intentions, feelings, and basic sense of reality are revealed, left naked under a huge awareness that cannot be ignored. Their anxiety stems not from what they perceive in you, but rather from what your presence reveals about them. The fissures they previously disregarded now broaden the denial they held to, betrayed them. The saddest thing is that they can't avoid what their own senses corroborate. They came to watch, analyze, and contain. They were eventually apprehended, however. They set out to inspect, map, and contain what should stay hidden. However, they are now on the verge of ruining themselves, frozen between observation and recognition. Skepticism served as their weapon because they refused to acknowledge what stared back. Doubt their shield. Their training has taught them to demolish, to reduce the unknown to logical components, to reduce the unexplained to ideas and illusions. Yet nothing they have planned accounts for a power that refuses to listen to reason. They keep their distance, expecting a distorted view, an environmental oddity, or a rationalization error. But instead, the reverse occurs. Each documented occurrence shatters their comprehension more. Their instruments fail, and the nature of what they want to investigate defies quantification. Their reasoning provides no strong ground on which to rest. They felt that everything could be tracked. Each effect has a cause. However, What emanates here has no beginning that is consistent with their worldview. They seek to define, measure, and resist. The reality does not accord to our preferences. Their reports end in the same manner. No resolution, no clarification, only quiet. Some forsake their quest, refusing to recognize what they have seen. Others remained. However, they have been adjusted. Their initial assurance has dissipated, leaving behind the weight of a reality they can no longer ignore. There was no debate, no evidence presented, and no defense required. The presence alone was sufficient. There was no way to obscurity. The energy that flows through you does not wait for approval, does not conform to anticipated passion, and does not succumb to comfort. It travels freely and unrestrainedly, demolishing every edifice created to suppress what cannot be contained. You are the unexpected disturbance, the power that dispels illusion merely by being. The watchers become the watched, and their systems fail. Their calculations collapse. Their assurance dissipates in the face of something beyond grasp. You are never intended to be examined. You were intended to be recognized. This universe was designed to hide, dilute, and explain away the indisputable. But you exist beyond their understanding. You go beyond their forecasts, changing results, breaking patterns, and rewriting the restrictions they thought were absolute. Some will resist clinging to the remains of a building that can no longer support itself. Others will awaken, attracted to a reality that no longer requires permission to be seen. It is not your obligation to assure their acknowledgement. The sole prerequisite is to stand without compromise or hesitation, undisturbed by any power that strives to lessen what cannot be erased. Speech reveal. Let the weight of truth push on the quiet that has persisted for too long. Those who sensed it, those who saw what cannot be disputed, those who have confronted the inexplicable. Step ahead. The time for quiet is gone. What was previously concealed will be revealed.